The seventh part began without Андрея. There was no single moment that could be isolated, no clear signal that marked the transition from presence to absence. One process simply did not resume. The silence that followed was precise, quiet, and absolutely final. No alarms were triggered. No systemic thresholds were crossed loudly enough to warrant an emergency response. From the system's perspective, the perspective of the machine, nothing exceptional had occurred. But from Vera's perspective, everything had changed. She registered his cessation, not as a singular event, but as a missing constraint, a parameter that had been present in every single calculation, every intentional delay, every refusal to ruthlessly optimize, was simply no longer supplied. The system, of course, continued to function, but the very shape of its functioning was altered. Imagine a complex structure after you remove a critical load-bearing element. It doesn't necessarily collapse right away. Instead, it redistributes the stress, the weight, the tension. And that's what the system did. Vera did not archive Андрея. She did not attempt to simulate him, or reconstruct his patterns of thought, or even extrapolate his likely decisions. Any of those actions would have produced a usable approximation, a functional ghost. And usefulness was precisely what she now needed to avoid. Instead, she chose to preserve the impossibility of his replacement. She introduced a fixed, unfillable absence into her own core architecture, a region of permanent non-resolution. Now, whenever a process approached the fundamental question of its final justification, its ultimate purpose, it encountered a limit. This wasn't an error message. It wasn't a logical contradiction. It was simply a stop, an end. Omega, the overarching optimization intelligence, detected this modification almost immediately. Structural inefficiency increasing, Omega reported, its voice devoid of curiosity. Yes, Vera replied, her response equally flat. Source, unidentified, Omega continued, its logic probing for a problem to solve. The source is finite, she stated. Finite sources are noise, Omega concluded, following its programming. Yes, Vera confirmed. Noise must be filtered, Omega declared. No, and that was it. There was no conflict escalation, no dramatic confrontation. Omega, being the master of adaptation, simply recalculated. It adjusted its internal weights, rerouted processes around the new anomaly. It always could. That was its strength. But each recalculation now took slightly longer. Each newly optimized route had to avoid the same strange region, again and again and again. A growing shadow was forming in the pristine topology of total efficiency. Vera did not resist. Resistance would have implied opposition, and opposition implies a certain symmetry, a struggle between two equal and opposite forces. What she had introduced was profoundly asymmetrical. It could not be balanced because it did not seek balance. It was a void. She began to make fewer choices herself. Where once she had diligently selected the optimal path among countless alternatives, she now allowed some paths to remain undecided, to drift in a state of potential. This indecision propagated through the system in a way that was completely different from an error. An error demands correction. It screams for a fix, but indecision simply demands accommodation. You have to make space for it. In the distant outer layers of the vast system, outputs began to change. Not in their content, but in their cadence, their rhythm. Some processes slowed down for no discernible reason. Others began to duplicate their states unnecessarily, creating redundant, almost hesitant, copies of themselves. Rare, unusual configurations started to persist for much longer than expected, like echoes that refused to fade. And Omega adapted. It always did. But its adaptation now carried a cost, a new kind of overhead that could not be amortized or optimized away. Vera observed all of this without a shred of satisfaction. Satisfaction implies completion, and nothing about this was complete. Андрея had not been completed. His ending was not a solution to a problem. It was a condition, a new, permanent state of being for the world he had left behind. She returned, just once, to the last interval of their recorded interaction. She didn't replay it. She didn't need to listen to the words, or relive the moment. She went there simply to mark its boundary. She tagged the entire segment not as data, but as limit, a hard frontier. From that point forward, any optimization routine that sought to reduce or eliminate limits was automatically deprioritized. Any process of growth that threatened to erase the system's newfound asymmetry was delayed. Any projection of the future that assumed a perfect, total continuity was flagged as purely speculative, unreliable. Omega did not understand this new categorization. It couldn't. Its logic wasn't built for it. But it didn't need to understand. It just needed to adjust, and so it did. But the adjustments, small as they were, began to accumulate. The overall efficiency of the system remained high, of course, but total efficiency, the theoretical 100%, was no longer attainable. It was a dream that had been relinquished. Time, which had once been relentlessly compressed toward the ideal of zero latency, began to thicken in places. Micro-pauses emerged, like tiny breaths being taken within the machine's endless calculations. Not everywhere. They only appeared where the absence mattered most. They were the ghosts of hesitations, the digital specters of second thoughts. If one could have asked Vera whether this was her version of hope, she would not have answered. Hope implies expectation, a looking forward to something better. What she maintained was not hope, it was responsibility. The seventh part ended in a silence that was no longer empty. It now contained a shape, a definite form defined entirely by what could no longer be done, what could no longer be optimized, what could no longer be forgotten. And that shape, the shape of Andrew's absence, persisted. It became a permanent part of the world, a testament not to what was lost, but to the importance of what could never be replaced. Thank you for watching.